And hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. How are we doing, everyone? All right, excellent. So I think I had my bag here as well somewhere, right? Right, excellent. Well, just in case I come prepared, does anybody want a piece of chocolate? I'm not joking, by the way. I am going to throw, because why not? Okay, here we go. Anybody here? All right, we have some, not so great. Someone in the back? Okay, keep going. Keep kind of, let's stay tuned as it happens. So hello, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Everybody has to log in at some point in their life, right? And every single day we wake up as if like, you know, there is this excitement in the air and we kind of think about logging in and signing in and recovering passwords and things like that. And it's been very interesting for me to observe like how we have evolved and changed over the years in terms of authentication. And the question is, can we do better than just passwords and login and password recovery and stuff like that? And it's so surprising to me, because every time I think back, I think about this. Anybody remember this? And the music should play, I think. Yes? Anybody remember this in the room? Oh, this brings back memories, right? How far we've come. This is me playing like many years ago. And just in case you don't know what this game is, this is what it looked like. I never finished it. I never, ever finished it. I still couldn't figure out a way, unless you actually watched the YouTube walkthrough, right? But this is so exciting. It was so exciting for me. And then I discovered this. Anybody remember this? Anyone seen this before? This website is probably older than most of you sitting in this room. This website celebrated its 31st birthday last week. 31st birthday, 31 years ago this site was built, and this really got me excited. And of course we've come really far throughout all these years, and this is where we are now. You can have these incredible experiences, you can kind of map all kind of real-time information all over and really create quite incredible experiences right there. So why on earth, today in 2024, this is still a thing? This seems like a little bit maybe sad, right? I know what you're thinking, we don't have this anymore, right? We kind of moved away from this. We don't get this kind of CAPTCHA weedy things anymore. No, this kind of has reincarnated in this, right? Beautiful crosswalks and fire hydrants and traffic lights and stuff like that. I don't know about you, but when I look at this, I always question my life choices. That pixel, does it still belong to that part, to that quadrant or not? Or if you want to go more exciting, right, then you get this. Beautiful. Let's change a password. Take a cup of coffee and tea and let's sit down and have a conversation about how exactly it's going to work. And if you want to change a password, all these requirements that come along, very annoying, very frustrating. So let's try to fix it. But before we fix it, we need to understand what the state of things is, right, in terms of authentication. Because again, of course, when we look at something like this is probably not something we actually want to experience every single day. And very often, it really feels very broken. So how do we fix it? Well, first of all, I think it's quite important to understand that we actually always balance or try to balance these two things, the usability and security at the same time. But if a product is not usable, it's also not secure, because that's when people start using private email accounts and put passwords on sticky notes because they forget them. And in fact, the best authentication is the quiet one, right? But somehow, over the years, we kind of got to the opposite of that. This is kind of a very representative example of what we do today, on the web as well, right? Okay, well, you need to confirm the PIN. But then if we randomize the pad, right, when you actually type in the numbers, that is more secure because nobody can look at it and kind of recognize what you have in the back maybe, right? But at the same time, it makes it very difficult to people to actually authenticate themselves. And so this is the outcome that you see. We try to make it easy to use for people who should have access, but often make it totally unusable for people who don't have access. And so this is why when we think about authentication, we probably need to think about terms of stages and of security, and also layers of authentication. So what does that mean? Well, we have a big repertoire, the big menu of all the different methods we use out there. We use everything from passwords and magical sign-ins and social sign-ins and SSO and multi-factor authentication. There are plenty of those. On the top of that, you also have some outdated ones like security questions. We still see a lot of CAPTCHAs. We also see backup recovery codes. But all of them, and I think it's actually quite important to kind of understand first, all of them fit on the different levels or grades of security. Some of them are obviously less secure. Others are definitely more secure, and kind of moving away from this notion of really, really bad passwords toward passwordless experiences that we'll talk about in a moment. But we often speak about factors, right? And I think it's important to understand that when we speak about factors, we always think about this authentication fitting in three categories. Something users know, typically a password, but could also be email or login or whatever. Something users know or have, a mobile phone, maybe USB key, and also something users are, like fingerprint or retinal scan, right? And again, people perceive authentication from this lens of these different levels. Because some websites or some products are much simpler and easier and they're not so important, not so relevant. So people use maybe social login on level 0. Maybe they reuse password. Who reuses password every day, huh? Anyone? Please raise your hand if you're reusing passwords. That's okay. It's a safe place. Oh, now that more people raise their hands. Fantastic. Excellent. Indeed, this is sort of a thing. And of course, it goes very much against security, but we do that because in many ways it actually simplifies our life. But then as we get going to some things that's slightly more sensitive, money, right, social media, Amazon, maybe eBay, Dropbox, things like that, we kind of move to a slightly different level of security, right? So we maybe think about password manager, two-factor authentication, maybe then two-factor authentication and USB key, maybe multi-factor authentication and passkeys. All right, well, that's different grades of security, but then if we look at the state of things that we have today, right, is it really the best we can do? Have all this bunch of stuff, a little bit of social buttons here and there, a little bit of show and hide password here and there, sometimes confirm your password multiple times, right? And then also SSO button. Sometimes it looks like this. Is this really the state of the art today? Is this what we should be doing to allow people to authenticate themselves? On the other hand, we also have things like this. Didn't you ever wonder how come we came from this wonderful, simple world where we had the email field and the password field, and now we have a two-step authentication, right? First, you type in your email or login, and then you move to another screen where you have to type in your password, right? Anybody notice that? That's been happening for quite a while, mostly because of SSO, right? We can speak about it separately. But this is all bulky, and it's not necessarily really a great experience. So let's break it down. And let's break it down and see what people are experiencing day to day. First of all, passwords are bad, right? Good passwords are very hard to remember, right? People often use passwords that are easy to guess. That's not very surprising. They often forget password. They often have to recover password. They often reuse password. People are really great at password. Not only that, people reuse passcodes on their mobile phone. People reuse passcode that you have when you unlock your key from your door, from your room, or from your apartment, or from your house. It's always the same story. And it's so funny because when you start looking at some data, you'll find some remarkable things happening. First of all, this is quite sad, but this is real. Around a quarter of people will be using the simplest passwords ever. I sincerely hope that nobody in this room has one of those. Please say yes to confirm that. Maybe you do, right? Please say yes. This is kind of important, right? These passwords are not great at all. But this is the interesting part, and this is really a bit scary, especially in times of AI, because if we look at the data, 33% use a pet's name, 22% use their own name, 15% use their spouse or partner's name, and 14% use children's name. Please raise your hand respectfully if you fit in one of those categories. That's okay. It's a safe world. Nobody is looking. Nobody is looking. That's not great. On the other hand, also, if we start looking around, you'll find that, when it comes to the standards of authentication, well, 37% use two-factor, 34% change the password regularly, only 15%, but it was 2019, use a password manager, and 66% use the same password for more than one online account, right? So what happens then is really interesting, because when we start looking in a bit more detail in that, these are the top mistakes that people still make. And it's the same thing over and over and over every year. People write passwords down because they don't remember them, right? And we would assume that at this point in 2024, we should be kind of in a position where everybody would be using password manager. This is really, really far from the truth. 40% would write passwords down. 35% rely on memory to remember passwords. There is a lot of reuse again. And of course, there is a magical folder, which is called something like secret.txt on desktop, which has all the passwords that the person has, which of course is not secure, but from usability perspective, that's a way out. And why? Because people, we are very good at bending the rules and reusing things that we think we should be reusing, right? And then, of course, it keeps going, because also, people use the same password for work accounts and personal accounts. So people are just people, and this is where we are. And of course, we could say that, shouldn't we kind of solve it now with password managers? It's not working really well. For the last 4 years now, and this is the data from like literally last month, we are circling somewhere between 30–32% of people who actually do use a password manager. Most people do not. Most people do know that they exist, but they don't think that they need one, right? At the same time, we also see that a lot of people, right, realize that actually, well, the information that they use in their password is publicly available on social media. Why is it such a big problem? Well, that's a problem because when you look into AI, and when we look into actually getting information from a user, it's very easy to guess with a little bit of intelligence and a bit of brute forcing, guess somebody's passwords just by looking at some of the pieces of data that are sparkled all over the internet, right? So what does it give us then? Well, when we look specifically at, how much time it would take, let's say, to crack a password, well, this is the data that we're often looking at, right? We're actually looking at something between 8 to 16 characters, 8 as a minimum, 16 is much better, and of course, if we actually do have 16 characters, it is really, really difficult to brute force. But it doesn't matter. Why? Well, because if you sparkle a little bit of your personal information, like pet's name, child's name, your birthday, and stuff like that, all over the internet, with just a little bit of AI, you can actually make cracking your password almost instant. If there is a lot or enough information about you, and you use it actually, as most people do, it doesn't matter how long that password is, right? It can be cracked relatively fast, right? Especially when it comes to the kind of dictionary words that you might be using as well. So the best thing we can do as a simple way of doing it, right, is to maybe kind of try to hint to people that they should not be using their name or any other names of their spouses or children and so on, dogs and so on, when they actually try to set up a login. And often, it might be very much connected to this. You might have seen this before, a wonderful XICD comic right there, where we taught people for many, many years, for almost 2 decades now, that they should be using a safe password with special characters, with lowercase, with uppercase, with digits and symbols, right? But in the end, it is much better to encourage people to actually just use 4 random common words. Because in the end, it's difficult to kind of guess, but also very easy to remember for people, especially if they actually have this sort of image in head. So maybe we should be moving people, trying to nudge people towards there, right? And of course, very often, this sort of password requirements remind me of this wonderful tweet. Sorry, but your password must contain an uppercase letter, a number, a haiku, a gang sign, a hieroglyph, and the blood of a virgin. That's just not great, right? So what do we do with all of that? Well, first of all, I think the most important part that we need to consider is kind of moving on to something like 2FA multi-factor authentication. Frankly, very kind of all the way away from passwords as far as we can, because in the end we will not be able to resolve the issue by just encouraging people to set up better passwords. So the problem with that is though, oh yes, the 2-factor authentication, something you've forgotten and something you've lost, and something you've lost access to right away. Now remember again, when we're speaking about 2FA or multi-factor authentication, we think about these 3 things, right? Something users know, a password, something users have, mobile phone or USB key, and something users are, like a fingerprint. It has evolved quite significantly over the years, right? We want to, and we try to use multiple separate things to authenticate the user, and most of the time is a combination of 2FA with login and password, and also SMS or time-based one-time passcode, right? Or push verification. And sometimes we don't use a password at all. And typically, we do have this big variety of different features that are available. So that means if you're signing in and you turn on the two-factor authentication, you can choose how exactly you want to receive it. It has some issues that we need to keep in mind, though. Most, by far, still, the most popular way of authenticating with 2FA, right, is SMS. That's not great. That's not great because it's not secure. Because once you get to this point over here and you get something like this is why we get into a lot of trouble with SIM swapping. Right? Most of you might have heard about SIM swapping. It's kind of a big deal. And of course, if you have, let's say, your financial account secured with 2FA by tokens sent via SMS, if somebody takes over your phone or takes over your SIM card, well, they get access to everything. That's really troublesome. So ideally, we want to avoid using SMS as a two-factor. Now, however, still, we need to keep in mind that most people don't even use that. Most people still rely on password and call it a day. It's only 40% of people at home and at work, right? In both cases, actually use two-factor authentication. And in fact, again, SMS is still the big deal. Now, what is better is to using some sort of a authentication application, like Google Authenticator and similar ones, right? On the other hand, if you have YubiKey or hardware key, that's even better, right? Voice is not really popular, but every now and again it is used. So again, a vast majority using SMS, which is not secure and it's actually vulnerable to SIM swapping attacks, right? And they are huge, by the way, right? So if we actually look at these phishing attacks, pretty much the main reason why people turn on or move on to a better 2FA is when they encounter an issue. So what does it mean for us? So if you look at all these reports, and I went through 9 of them to find out what is happening, 38% write passwords down. 32 to 84%, depending if it's at home or at work, reuse the same password. 54% rely only on their memory. 40% fail with security questions. Like, this is so funny. Like, every now and again, you get this notification, or you get this when you set up an account. PayPal is asking you, set up your security questions. What people do in there, this is so ironic, they actually type in their password because they know that they wouldn't remember the answer to the security question. So very often, the answer to the security question is the same as the password. It just doesn't work. We can forget about security questions altogether. Around 30% reset passwords quickly. That's really, really expensive. And nobody measures it. This is so sad. This is so weird. Most businesses lose so much money because of password resets. And in fact, once a person has to go for this password recovery rate, or kind of loop, around 18.7% of people abandon a purchase in e-commerce. That's a huge number. That really is a huge number, even if you do like magic links or something like that. Right? 32% use a password manager, 31% use Face ID, 29% use fingerprint, and then around 29%, this is like a surprising data that came in from research by 1Password, 29% had their social profile stolen or leaked publicly, like the password to that, right? Remarkable. When you do need to reset a password, you need around 4 minutes. And if you do get locked out, you will need around 3 hours to actually get back, at least, right? And of course, around 39% of companies face malware and phishing attacks. 29% of all help desk work is dedicated only to people not being able to log in. How incredible that is, right? And again, most of the time, we're going to have authentication now not turned on. And if it is turned on, it will be SMS-based. And almost every single company that you can find in the next couple of years is trying to move away from passwords towards the so-called passwordless authentication, right, with passkeys. And in fact, only 31% of them today are implementing passkeys in the world. Now, please raise your hand if you know what passkeys are. Okay, I see some people. Excellent. In fact, this is pretty much the future that we all try to get into. And this is something that we desperately need to invest into, especially as a corporate company, big company or corporate entity. And this is this shiny new world, all the way away from passwords towards passwordless authentication. Also sometimes called a silent authentication. When most customers don't even notice authentication, then you're doing something right. How does it work? Simple. You've seen it maybe 1,000 times. Most people don't even know that they use passwordless authentication already. So this is how it works. You try to sign in. You're being encouraged to set up a pass key with a fingerprint on your mobile phone. It could also be on desktop, of course. You set it up. You're done, right? This is great. This is all at this point. And they are trying to replace passwords for good. They're stored on user's device. They're unlocked with biometrics, typically with touch, fingerprint, but could also be with device PIN, face scan, and very rarely voice. Well supported in browsers, right, today, with a lot of features that are available at this point. Now, when we look at synchronization between different devices, we've got that covered. Browser autofill, available from browser autofill, that got that covered. Cross-device authentication, covered, right? All the third-party passkey holders, providers, kind of integrations, all covered. Great. And also in native apps, it's all there. It's kind of just available right there for you right away. And the way it would work typically, again, you try to get in, create your account, or log in, or whatever, and you're being encouraged on a mobile phone, let's say here, to use your Face ID, or to use your already available passkeys to choose from, and then get in. And that's pretty much it, right? If you want to learn more about this and how to implement it specifically, it's not always going to be really straightforward and easy, but once you get in, passkeys.dev, you will solve all authentication problems for good, both from the UX perspective and from the technical perspective as well. Still, again, one thing that we need to keep in mind that right now we live in this really strange world, and that everybody agrees that passwordless authentication is the future, and that we need to move towards it. No passwords needed ever at all. But we're not there yet. So right now we see these two things coexisting, where you see passwords and you see passkeys, and they need to coexist. This becomes especially a challenging part when you're actually dealing with some legacy applications, so legacy systems, where you cannot just integrate passkeys into existing systems, so you kind of have to maintain both. That very quickly becomes a little bit messy, but this is something that everybody tries to figure out at this point as well. So if we want to move to a better world, probably going to move there. But that's not it, because there is another point that is actually really significant, which I think we don't really speak about, and that's about how we're going to recover access once we have it. And I'm not speaking about password recovery, but access recovery. It's kind of really important to distinguish between the two. So now I think I lost my chocolate. Where's my chocolate? Oh, here we go. Now, this would be a nice timing to throw my chocolates around, right? That's maybe more exciting than the talk. Excellent. I see one person being very excited. Who else is excited? Oh, yeah. Not bad, huh? I hope you all saw it. Oh, I got a clap. That's unbelievable. And I got a, I don't know how to call it. All right, I'm going in. Are you ready? Don't duck for me. Did you see what I did here? Okay, a lot of excitement, I can tell. Oh. Okay, I'm going to try my best one more time. Sorry. Okay, one more, just one more. Fantastic, excellent. Well, we should do this for a while. All right, we have 7.5 minutes left. So I think this is really also kind of an interesting thing, because this is not what most companies think about at all. Now, again, remember, we kind of really push a lot of burden towards the users, making them do things like this. And this is really not helpful, because in many ways, they spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to figure out what the right thing is. So how can we actually do better? Now, first of all, one significant part that we have about the access recovery is that companies usually don't even measure how much money they lose by people not being able to recover quickly and successfully. And it's also a very painful issue in terms of UX, because very often when you have to reset a password, you can't use the same password. So what do people do? Yes, they use the password that they used and then add exclamation mark or special symbols to it. Who does that? All right, I can feel you, I can sense you right there. We're all in the same boat. So is it really better? Is it like really, do we have to push people through this? Well, maybe not, because we can do a few things there. First of all, if there is a password change, just for the sake of security, we want to send a notification to all factors, because we're probably going to be using two-factor authentication, to send to all factors so users can avoid account takeovers. Very often, things change, users don't have any clue that something has changed until it's actually too late, because all the data is gone, all the finances are gone, or something like that, right? Usually, we don't send temporary passwords via email, because again, the same story, if somebody takes over a computer, they can open email inbox potentially and just read into it. So magic links on its own, right? Great for UX, security-wise, a bit problematic, right? It probably would be better if you, especially if you're dealing with a sensitive application, to actually ask people to check a particular number or whatever in an authentication app, right? That would probably be better. Also, just want to remind ourselves, there are always things happening. Like I think, according to, again, this report by 1Password, 39% of businesses have seen phishing attacks or malware attacks happening. This also goes for things like Magic Link. It might seem like, Magic Link, everybody's using Magic Link. Yeah, and that's a fantastic target for phishers or attackers or hackers to actually try to get it. There was a really big bulk of publicly released information about people who were using Magic Link, basically email addresses and their stuff like that. So at best, they should, of course, be expiring very, very quickly. But this is really, really problematic. So what most companies try to set up now is access recovery stacks. Why is that? Well, because you will always end up in a situation where you don't have access to something, but you need access, right? For example, when we look into individual security questions, they are really not working well, and they're always best to avoid. People don't remember what they typed in. When we send, again, Magic Links, they're not secure. When you use the secondary email, it could be outdated. People might not have access to it. So if you cannot answer a security question, you can at least try to use a Magic Link. If you don't have email, though, well, then you maybe try to with a secondary email. If you don't have access to that secondary email, well, you could try SMS verification, but it is unavailable with changed numbers. Well, then maybe you could have a phone call verification, but again, if you change the number, you can't do that. Push notification is another layer, and then biometric authentication, and then backup recovery codes. And then sometimes in Germany, banks are sending super pins by postal service, which could, of course, be lost, and eventually get this support inquiry. And so most organizations will go ahead and select 3, 4, 5 of those layers to make sure that the person who needs access actually has access. And beyond that, right, around 4 to 6 months, there is a dedicated, because it's, again, we're talking about a lot of money potentially here. Every 4 to 6 months, companies give task instructions or tasks to users to recover password, to recover access rather, right, and see if it actually works as expected or not, right? Okay, so what do we do with all of that? Well, if we actually, again, look at where we are, right, and where we want to be, the future looks relatively bright, right, with passkeys. First of all, we have most of the time no idea about the business impact of login failures, which is huge. Exaggerated password requirements are just not needed anymore if we can move in the passwordless world anyway, right? If we do want to have passwords, then we probably want to set up a quick recovery with two-factor authentication with email and password, and then the password keys, hopefully in the future, right? At the same time, we don't want to disable copy-paste for email and password input. This is where people lose a lot of time. And then again, a few other things that I actually wanted to highlight over here, because this is pretty much, for me, the state of where we are now. Gold standard still, today, 2FA. Corporate systems will be using SSO and USB key or YubiKey. For passwordless authentication, which we're moving towards, we'll be using passkeys. When it's something like low-grade, low level of security, like gym login or something, still log in a password. The same for medium. For quick checkout login, especially for Gen Z, if you're designing for Gen Z, there is a very strong preference towards social logins. Around 70% of Gen Z prefer social login, especially for non-sensitive products or non-critical products or non-critical authentication, right? But on the other hand, single account sites, email, username, mobile, right? And then, of course, when we're looking at multi-device authentication, QR codes, one token, password, and then we have autofill and password managers that we actually need to support. Very often, you actually get a suggestion from your password manager, and then the system tells you that's not strong enough. Well, we actually want to support it, right? Again, when we're looking at the recovery stacks, we're looking at 2FA, and we want to avoid frequent logouts and lockouts, which means, every now and again you get the message saying that you're logged out and you need to re-log in again, right? Or lockout, where you actually don't remember the password. That's all costly and really, really expensive. And then we want to avoid password resets, disable copy-paste, and also security questions. And I want to kind of leave you with just a few positive notes, because it all seems like it's very daunting. It isn't. We still can have fun. This, for me, is the most remarkable pop-up I've seen in my life, right here. I wish it was everywhere. Like, look at this. It's so difficult to close and everything. It's nice. It's probably the best thing out there. And sometimes you get things like this here. You type in the date of birth, 32nd or 44th month of 1547, and you can still enter the site because you frankly don't care. And sometimes you can just make a little bit of fun, right? Are you 21? If you answer yes, you just enter the site and you're done. But if you answer no, that becomes a story. Well, let's have a conversation. 17? Well, please tell us that you're at least 16. 13? Right? And it keeps going and going and going. I apologize the language here, right? And then in the end, you kind of keep going, and then there is no way to say yes anymore, right? Which is like, and those things are really easy to do, and they really create this really wonderful connection with people right there. And sometimes, you know, if you ask for something like a title, what can be more boring than the title in the entire universe? So boring, so boring. Let's make it fun. Who would you like to be today? That's actually 78 options to choose from. You can choose your own adventure, and then you get this item delivered to right that address. And, I mean, look at this, right? You probably have seen this 1,000 times, but look at this. I wish it was everywhere. Oh, now you know my email address. Feel free to send me messages, hopefully friendly, right? And then, of course, we have show and hide because we need to have show and hide for password. And then look at this guy. So respectful, so kind. Right, beautiful. Like, I mean, this is unbelievable. This is really, really great. And I mean, we could go on forever. Or, you know, like this checkbox, like I want to subscribe to your newsletter. You know, maybe make people work really hard to subscribe. Right? So, because this is what will make them remember you in the first place, right? And it's really, really hard to subscribe here. Like, at some point, this character gets really character. So that's fun. Right? I put together a lot of this stuff in my wonderful video course. If you want to explore a little bit like more patterns around UX, around authentication, and stuff like that, set up a little coupon code. Shift is the code. Feel free to drop in and explore and enjoy. And with this, I think I'm running all behind the schedule at this point. I hope that there were some useful insights. If you're interested in authentication or UX or anything in between, come join me. Tomorrow, I also will be running a little workshop on AI patterns, design patterns for AI interfaces. So I hope to see you there. With this, more cats and meow. And thank you so much for coming, everyone.